Hello everyone, I am Carlo Cunanan from BSE 1A, and today we're going to learn the three theories about first language acquisition and second language acquisition, which is the B.F. Skinner's behavioristic theory or the operant conditioning theory, the Noam Chomsky universal grammar theory, and lastly the Stephen Krashen theory about the second language acquisition or the development theory. Language can be learned the way we learn other behaviors. Before we start to explain what this first theory all about, let's back and talk about the vowel theory. Vowel theory believes that language originated by imitation of natural sounds. They started naming animals by imitating and echoing the sound they've heard. For example, when a person heard a bird doing or making a tweet sound, they could have imitated that sound to tell that a bird just flew by. In relation to this theory, when we are teaching our child to clap like clap, 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 we are teaching our child not only on how to clap, also we started to teach our child a language. Our child is now learning the language through imitation of the sounds around their environment. When they heard the word clap, their behavior to clap their hands will happen because they know what clap means. A child is learning a language the way she or he learned a certain behavior. And for this theory, behavioristic theory, this is acceptable. Behavioristic theory argues that a process of language acquisition for an infant is similar to the process of learning behavior. They believe that language acquisition and development are learned behavior, and at the process that involves an active thought. So the only thing that this theory focuses is on the behavior, not in social interaction, neither on the mind of the child. To expand our knowledge about this theory, let's move on to the basic tenets of behavioristic theory. We have 5 basic tenets of it, and now let's talk about it. First, we have behaviorist theory dwells only on spoken language, meaning this theory is only applicable in verbal behavior and not in written language. Its primary medium is oral speech. Second, we have stimulus response. In this theory is a pure case of conditioning. When we say conditioning, a particular behavior is learned, and the learning could be a process of imitation of language from the environment of the child or learner. Third, all learnings are establishment of reinforcement and reward. It could be a praised hugs, kisses, or material reward, and anything that gives a passive response to a child. The fourth and the last tenet is behaviorist theory is the habit formation theory of language in teaching or in learning, which remind us the learning of structural grammar. For it to become a habit, it goes through a process of imitation, reinforcement, practice, and repetition. When we say repetition, it is the result of habit formation. And to show you how it works and the process before it became a habit formation, I will give you an example. When a mother teaching her child to say mama, this is called stimulus or a behavior. Then when the baby tried to mimic the sounds by saying the word mama, that is the process of imitation. And when the baby said the word correctly, we intend to give her a hand or a clap because the baby said the word correctly. And that is what we call giving a reward. Clapping is equals to reward and reward equals to response. When a child gets a reward, the child intends to practice the word mama for the second time, and after a long practice, we consider the baby repeated the word, the surprises of repetition, because the baby feels appreciated for doing the good behavior that triggered him or her to repeat the behavior again, which is like to become a habit. And that is what this theory trying to explain to us. John B. Watson was actually the major proponent of this theory, an American psychologist that popularized the scientific theory of behaviorism and also the founder of behaviorism. B.F. Skinner, on the other hand, became popular because of his operant conditioning chamber in the behavioristic theory, meaning these both theories support each other. Operant conditioning is the use of consequences to modify the occurrence and form a behavior. It refers to the conditioning in which a child reduces or produces rather a response which is the other runs or this operand. is maintained by reinforcement. Take note, consequences can be a reward or punishment. In addition, operant conditioning is a learning behavior that will help the children to acquire language. Take note, you must remember that in operant conditioning, there should be a reward to increase the desired behavior of a child. It has two forms, which are the reinforcement and punishment. Reinforcement is a reward given or taken to a child to increase the desired behavior, while punishment is given to reduce an undesired behavior. Both reinforcement and punishment can be both divided into two, the positive and negative. Positive reinforcement is the addition of stimulus. Negative reinforcement is the removal of unpleasant stimulus. Positive punishment, on the other hand, is the addition of aversive stimulus. Negative punishment is totally removing pleasant stimulus. In conclusion to this theory, a child acquires mother tongue habits by the use of varied babblings, which are similar to the words ordered by a person around them. However, as now Chomsky reviewed the operant conditioning theory by Skinner, Chomsky said that Skinner misunderstood the language, and to be fair, he also stated in his review that language is not predictable and will not acquired by just reinforcement and reward. So as a contrary to Skinner's operant conditioning, Noam Chomsky introduced his universal grammar theory. This theory states that when a child is born, he is born in this world with a basic set of language skills, meaning he is not empty because they already have the language acquisition device, or the LAD, inside their brains. They are able to learn language so quickly because language is innate, meaning language is inborn. We already have that when we enter this world. To understand more about LAD, let's go into a little more detail on the LAD. Chomsky proposed that every child was born with a LAD that holds the fundamental rules for language. In other words, children are born with an understanding of the rules of language. They simply need to acquire the vocabulary. Chomsky offered a number of pieces of evidences to support his theory. He posed that language is fundamentally similar across all of humanity. For instance, every language has something that is like a noun and a verb, and every language has the ability to make things positive or negative. Chomsky also discovered that when children are learning to speak, they don't make errors would you expect. For instance, children seem to understand that all sentences should have the structure, subject, verb, and object, even before they are able to speak in full sentences. From his experiments, Chomsky also noted that young children, well before reaching the language fluency, would notice if adults around them spoke in a grammatically incorrect manner. He also found that children attempt to apply grammatical rules to words for which their language makes an exception. For example, in following the English rules of grammar, a child might pluralize the word fish as fishes and deer as deers, even though our language makes exception for those words. First, language acquisition refers to the way children learn their native language. Second, language acquisition refers to the learning of another language or languages besides the native language. Before we continue to the last theory, do you know what type of language acquisition the first two theories? Behavioristic theory or operant conditioning theory and universal grammar theory belongs to the first language acquisition. When we say first language acquisition, it is the way children learn their native language. But what about the second language acquisition? In order to compare the first language acquisition and second language acquisition, let's have the development theory or the theory of second language acquisition by Stephen Krashen. The development theory is all about practice and progress, and to understand what this theory is all about, Mr. Krashen proposed 5 hypotheses regarding to this theory, and we will talk about it one by one. First, we have the acquisition learning hypothesis. Acquisition learning hypothesis. According to Cunanan, there are two independent systems of foreign language performance: the language acquisition and the language learning. The language acquisition is the product of subconscious process that is very similar to the process on how children undergo when they acquire their first language, that is natural communication. Speakers here are concentrated not in the utterances, but in a communicative act. Next, we have the language learning. Language learning is a product of formal instructions, so it is a conscious process which results in a conscious knowledge about the language. Example, knowledge in grammar rules. It is necessary to say that a deductive approach in a teacher-learner-centered setting produces learning, while in inductive approach in a student-centered settings leads to acquisition. The second hypothesis that we have is the monitor hypothesis. The monitor hypothesis explains the relationship between acquisition and learning. According to Cunanan, the acquisition system is the utterance initiator while the learning system performs the role of a monitor. This monitor acts in a planning, editing, and correcting function, where three specific conditions are met: the sufficient time, focus on form, and knowledge of the roles. So, the roles of monitor is to connect deviations from normal speech to give speech a more polished appearance. Cunanan also identifies language learners with regards to monitor use. He distinguished those learners that use monitor all the time as overusers, those learners who have not learned or preferred not to use their conscious knowledge are underusers, and those learners that use monitor appropriate are optimal users. Usually, extroverts are underusers, while introverts and perfectionists are overusers. Lack of self-confidence is frequently to the overusers of the monitor. Third, we have the input hypothesis. It is Cunanan's attempt to explain how second language acquisition takes place. According to this hypothesis, the learner improves and progresses along natural order. When they receive the second input, that is one step beyond to the current stage of linguistic competence. In this hypothesis, Cunanan discovered that natural communicative input is the key in designing a syllabus. Next, the fourth hypothesis of development theory is the effective filter hypothesis. This hypothesis says that a number of effective variables plays a facilitative with no casual role in second language acquisition. These variables include motivation, self-confidence, anxiety, and personal trait. Cunanan claims that learners with high motivation, self-confidence, good self-image, and a loud level of anxiety and extroversion are better equipped for success in the second language acquisition. On the contrary, or on the other hand, low motivation, low self-esteem, anxiety, introversion, and inhibition can raise the effective filter and form of mental block that impedes language acquisition. So for acquisition to take place, positive effect is necessary but sufficient in its own. The fifth and the last hypothesis is the natural order hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that the acquisition of grammatical structures follow a natural order which is predictable for a given language. Some grammatical structures tend to be acquired early while others are late. This hypothesis also accounts for students' mistakes and errors that the students make mistake when the structure used has not been completely acquired. However, a student can use their learned competence to modify their production, so the best way to correct students' mistake is to provide more input containing the structure in question. We must take into consideration that we don't need to change the order of presentation of language. In fact, Cunanan suggests that we present the language without any conscious effort to organize it. On the contrary, he recommends a syllabus based on topic functions and situations. In conclusion, it is necessary to know the theories to improve our practices. It is always important to start a meaningful interaction in the target language by means of natural communication. comprehensible input is necessary for the acquisition of the language. Now that we're done in these three theories about language acquisition, let's compare and contrast their main idea by stating their good and bad points to give you some key points regarding to those three theories. Okay, now let's start. Operant conditioning states that language can be acquired through reinforcement and punishment, while universal grammar states that language is innate, meaning it was inborn. The only thing that we need to acquire is the vocabulary. Development theory, on the other hand, states that language can be acquired through learning and acquisition. Aside from that, operant conditioning theory and universal grammar theory was on a first language acquisition, while development theory was on a second language acquisition. So based on the idea of Ma'am Maricar that operant conditioning and universal grammar is first language acquisition and development theory is the second language acquisition, I will agree, totally agree on that. Because on the theory itself, operant conditioning is the acquiring of mother tongue language and universal grammar was innate, meaning they are on the first language acquisition because first language acquisition refers to the way children learn their native language. Development theory, on the other hand, was on the second language acquisition because it talks about more practice and progress. To conclude, operant conditioning and universal grammar is the first language acquisition, while development theory is the second language acquisition. Now, I think we already reached the end of the topic, so let's end it here. Hello again, everyone. Goodbye and God bless us all.